Good morning. My name is Clark Miller, and I'm a professor at the School for the Future of Innovation in Society at Arizona State University. This is the first of a series of videos that I'm going to make on the topic of knowledge management and knowledge analysis. Knowledge management in recent years has gotten a bit of a bum break, I would say, in favor of its newer cousin, information management. I think this is a shame because in a sense, information is just data. It's ones and zeros. It's billions of tweets every day. And knowledge, on the other hand, is information that has value or that has meaning to a user, to somebody who needs that knowledge. And so what organizations I think really are in the business of is knowledge management. That is in the management of information for the purposes of creating not just data, but data that has value and data that has meaning to the organization and to what it needs in order to make good decisions, in order to manage its processes, in order to achieve its goals. And so I think knowledge management is an undervalued set of skills and ideas. And so I'm making this set of videos in order to talk through why I think knowledge management is an important topic for people to understand, an important set of skills for people to have. So with that, let's get started. The first video tackles what I think is the most important question, which is what is knowledge? At least what is knowledge from the perspective of a knowledge analyst or a knowledge manager? And I've already given you some ideas about that, but here's some more. So let's start with the dictionary definition of knowledge. Knowledge is a noun, and it means, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the sum of what is known, the body of truth, information, and principles acquired by humankind. I think there's some good things about this definition, but I also think that there are some real problems with this definition when we're thinking about it from the standpoint of knowledge management. So let's start with the first half of the definition, the sum of what is known. It immediately, to me at least, begins to raise a series of questions. But what is known? Right? This is not an abstract question. It's a very concrete question. What do we know? We have just here in the United States been through a presidential election in which the question of whether we knew who voted for whom and had an accurate count of those votes so that we could know who was elected president, right? Were very real, very contested questions, right? And so what is known is a very important question for knowledge managers. How is it known, right? So if it is the sum of what is known, how do we know that it's known? Known by whom, right? Is this known by, is this an aggregate of everything that is known by everyone? Is it an elite body of knowledge like science that has been pronounced as true by some sort of certification process? Right? So known by whom? What counts in this sum of what is known? And known according to what standards of truth or reliability? What does it take for a bit of information, a bit of fact, a bit of truth, if you will, to get into this body of what is known, if you will? Likewise, the second half of this definition, the body of truth, information, and principles acquired by humankind. One of the things I like about this definition is that truth, information, and principles are very different things. They're radically different things, right? And so to say that they all fall under this category of knowledge is an important statement that there are different kinds of knowledge, right? Different ways, if you will, of knowing things, right? But we still have these kind of underlying questions. How is this body of stuff assembled? How do we decide what goes in it, right? Some of these things, truth, information, and principles, are easily located, right? If we're looking for data, right, we can go find it in Amazon's servers, Apple's servers, Facebook's servers, all have enormous amounts of data in them. We can go find that data, right? But truth, in some senses, is sometimes a little harder to find, a little harder to curate. You can't always write it down. We talk about indigenous knowledge sometimes as a form of knowledge that can be difficult to write down, to capture in digestible form that you can put in a database somewhere and have access to it, right? So when we talk about the body of truth, information, and principles, right, is this a written down list somewhere, or is it a more abstract idea? And of course, still we have this question, which kinds of things do we get to put in this assemblage? If there's different kinds of stuff, truth, information, principles, data, facts, theories, right, hypotheses, we have all kinds of different words to describe different kinds of knowledge. And which of those things do we count in this body of knowledge? So I always like to start with dictionary definitions because they give us a sense of how ordinary language uses a word, the kinds of connotations that a word has in our everyday use. But in this case, it's a little bit wishy-washy, if you will, for the purposes of thinking about knowledge management, although it certainly gives us some good places to start. So another place that we can start in thinking about knowledge is different disciplines, right? And so many different disciplines have articulated ideas about knowledge and what knowledge is. And so, just to run through these, one of the things we quickly discover is that when we talk about knowledge, we often mean very different things when we go from one discipline to the next. So philosophy, for example, defines knowledge as true statements about the world, right? So things like mathematical proofs fall into the category of knowledge because they are truth. We know that, at least given a set of assumptions, they're true, right? They're not things that can be called into question. And so they rise to the category of knowledge, right? Science, which is not dissimilar from philosophy, nonetheless talks about knowledge in a different way. It talks about the observed laws, theories, and facts about nature, about how the world works. So E equals mc squared, Einstein's famous equation relating energy to the square of the speed of light times the mass of an object, it is taken to be knowledge, right? We know that, at least within the realm of assumptions that we call classical physics, E equals mc squared holds as a good mathematical model of the relationship between energy and mass. Cybernetics, right? Data science, information science, right? These fields that are about computing and computational work, right, they tend to look at knowledge as just data and information, right? They are particularly concerned with, the amazing amounts of data that can be collected about the world and that can be then analyzed and processed and transformed into new forms. But particularly, they're concerned about what you do with data and information. And data and information are for them functionally equivalent to knowledge. And here we begin to get into the realms of disciplines where the kind of philosophical idea that knowledge is truth, right? That this is somehow a special status that we accord to certain kinds of information, certain kinds of statements about how the world works, which is also shared by science, right? Those begin to break down in the data sciences, and we begin to get a much more fungible notion of data and information that is a little bit less committed, if you will, to the idea that we can attach a special status to any of this that we might call knowledge. Computer scientists would say in some sense, well, we don't have knowledge. What we have is information, and we work with information, right? And so we need to think about information, right? When you think, go to the social sciences now, right? And we start to look at fields like psychology, and economics. Right now, knowledge becomes something much more specific. It's information that's stored in our brains. That's particularly the psychological perspective, but economics is very much these days a behavioral science that's tied to the psychology of individuals, right? So it's information that's stored in our brains and informs our choices, right? So for example, I know how to get to the store, right? If I walk out of my house and walk down the street and around the corner, right, I know I will get to the grocery store. That's knowledge in a behavioral sense, right? I know it, right? It's not information in the sense that it's not written down anywhere. If I have information like the address or the name of the store, I could search for it on Google Maps. And Google would then process an algorithm that includes all the information about where all the streets are and where physically I'm located, thanks to information it gets from the cellular towers about my location, relative location. It would locate me on the map, and then it would give me directions about how to get there, right? But that's different from what's in my head, which is a set of insights into where and how I take my body, travel, in order to get to that store, right? So this is stuff that's in our head, right? And so from a psychological or an economics perspective, it's absolutely crucial that someone knows it, right? That it's embodied in a person. By contrast, for sociologists and anthropologists, knowledge is not so much, it's not so important what's in one person's head, right? It becomes knowledge when it's in lots of people's heads, right? When it's shared throughout a group or a community, right? And then they ask questions, well, how did it get to be shared? Well, maybe there was a school and it taught all of them the same information as, truth about their world, American history, coming from an American history textbook, right, becomes shared knowledge on the part of all of us about what's going on in the world. Or maybe it was on CNN in a news report and millions of people watched it last night, right? And so then it becomes shared knowledge. in that sense, right? And so for sociologists and anthropologists, it's these collectively shared ideas, particularly ideas that have meaning or value to within those groups, right? That they call knowledge, right? And then there's this field, science and technology studies, which is the social study of science and technology and engineering, the social study of the technical stuff that has come to dominate modern societies in so many different ways. And there they tend to think not just about shared knowledge, right? Knowledge as shared ideas among groups, although this field is definitely derives its perspective predominantly from a kind of sociological or anthropological perspective. They're also interested in certification processes, right? So science in this sense, peer review, becomes a social mechanism for saying, well, which of our shared ideas should we grant the status of calling it knowledge, right? Or calling it science, right? And so in this view, right, it's not just that ideas travel among and within groups or communities. It's that those groups and communities over time develop strategies, mechanisms, processes, practices, things that they do to test ideas. And when they pass those tests, they rise to the level of a kind of specialized knowledge, right? We often call it expert knowledge, right? Something that is above, right? They create hierarchies of kinds of knowledge, and they grant special status and authority to some of those kinds of knowledge, like science, but also others, right? And like, for example, the claim that Biden won the election for president, right? We just went through an enormous array of certification processes. Each state had to certify its vote counts. And then based on those certified vote counts, the governors appointed electors, and those electors cast ballots in the electoral college for president. And then those votes were certified by the states again and sent to Washington, where Congress read those ballots, tallied them, and certified the election of president, right? And so we have all of that certification work going on to elevate this vote total from just a count of votes to an officially certified count of votes on which we base the Constitution bases the determination of who will be the next president, right? So knowledge in these different disciplines carries very different definitions, very different very different ideas about what it is and how it works in our societies. This is going to be important for knowledge management. And within knowledge management, then, I want to suggest that these ideas that are lower down on this list are the ones that are particularly important for knowledge managers and knowledge analysts to understand, because they begin to give us the foundations for having a critical purchase on what knowledge is and how it works within organizations, within groups, within communities, which is where we're doing knowledge management and on whose behalf we're doing knowledge management. So knowledge for a knowledge manager or a knowledge analyst is the body of shared ideas and claims to truth that are produced and certified by processes of knowledge making that occur within particular ways of knowing or knowledge cultures, right? Within particular communities And part of what makes a community, right, makes a group of people into something that's more than just an assembled group of people, makes them a community, is that they share ways of knowing. They share ways of making and certifying their ideas about what makes for knowledge. Right? So this way of thinking about knowledge is particularly useful for knowledge managers, because if you want to analyze or manage knowledge, you need to know a lot more than, is it true? Right? Because is it true doesn't really get you very far. And in some of the future videos, I'll talk about why that's the case. You need to also be able to ask a wide variety of questions, like who made it? How did they make it? What methods did they use? Why did they make it? And why did they make it that way as opposed to some other way? How is it communicated and used? That is the knowledge. How's knowledge communicated and used within your particular organization? How credible is it, the knowledge that you have, to different audiences? Right? We see in this election contest what happens when knowledge isn't credible to people that matter with respect to the community that we're trying to serve. Right? How would alternative methods have impacted the credibility of the knowledge? Who would they have made more credible or less credible? What are the strengths and weaknesses of how knowledge, a particular set of knowledge, got made? Might it turn out to not, in fact, be true? And what are the consequences that flow from that kind of a knowledge failure, right? From knowledge that we think we can count on, in fact, not being able to be counted on. So I just want to introduce some ideas here to end this first video that we'll explore in more depth in future videos, but which come out of this discussion that we've been having. So the first is that knowledge is socially constructed. It's the product of work that people do. Data doesn't just magically appear. You actually have to go out and collect it. You have to analyze it, transform it into knowledge. And that work is real human work, and it's subject to all of the things that human work is always subject to. It's specific to the social groups that produce it and use it, right? Knowledge is a shared idea within a community or within a group. It's shaped by the purposes for which it's created and to which it is put. There is no knowledge that is independent of the social context in which it is made and used. Doesn't mean we can't rely on it for a wide variety of different kinds of purposes, but it's something we need to be aware of. Right? It's the result of established practices and methods of knowledge making. It's different in different disciplines. And it's not necessarily true in a philosophical or a scientific sense, right? A big part of what I'm trying to articulate here is that when we're a knowledge manager or a knowledge analyst, the critical question that we should be asking is not, is it true? Right? That's not the first, foremost, and only question that matters. It's important, but it's not final. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in future videos.